When I got fired, my family didn't offer help. Instead, they took my brother on a vacation and bragged about it online. They told me, "We're done supporting you until you grow up," I said. "Enjoy the trip. I'll remember this when you need me." Then my mom shot back, "Maybe it's time you learned some responsibility." I just walked away. Hey Reddit, I'm Arlen, 32M, and I've been holding this story in for a while. I wasn't sure if it was even worth posting, but the more time passes, the more I think about how unfair everything was, and still is. Maybe someone out there has gone through something similar, or maybe writing it out will finally help me stop replaying everything in my head like it's still happening. Let me start by saying I've always been the dependable one, not in a "I'm a saint" kind of way, just the one who never asked for much, the one who showed up when asked, remembered birthdays, helped carry the heavy stuff. I did what I thought was the right thing because I figured someday, when it really mattered, my family would have my back too. Turns out, I was wrong. Back in November, I lost my job. I had been working in regional logistics management for a mid-sized company, nothing flashy, but it paid well enough, had benefits, and I was good at it. I managed a small team, coordinated shipping and warehouse schedules, the whole deal. It was the kind of job you didn't think much about until it was gone. The layoff was part of a company-wide downsizing after a merger. They called it restructuring. I called it a 10-minute meeting that ended 5 years of loyal work and left me holding a cardboard box and a vague promise of a letter of recommendation. Just like that, I was unemployed. Now, being out of work at 32 hits different than it did in your 20s. There's a pressure that sits in your chest constantly. I had rent, utilities, a car note, and savings that were already thin, thanks to a dental surgery I had paid for out of pocket earlier that year. I live in a city where everything costs just slightly more than it should but not quite enough to justify moving. So I did what people do. I applied for jobs every day, every morning like a ritual: resume, cover letter, coffee, rejection. I told my mom, Lean, 62F, about the layoff the night it happened. I wasn't looking for a rescue or anything, just some reassurance, some warmth. She was quiet at first, then said, "Well, sometimes life teaches us through hardship. Maybe this is a good time for you to reflect on what you really want." Which, okay, fine, maybe not what I needed to hear, but she's always been a bit philosophical about things. But then she pivoted into how proud she was of my younger brother, Silas, 27M, who had finally found his groove. I'll get to Silas in a bit. After the first month of unemployment, things got tighter. I took on a few freelance gigs, nothing stable, but it was something. I drove delivery on weekends, edited some academic papers for a friend, helped a neighbor clear out a storage unit for cash. It was patchwork income, but still, I paid my rent, though sometimes late, ate a lot of canned soup, and cut back on basically everything. Then one afternoon, I called my parents. I'd hit a wall and figured maybe, I could crash with them for a month or two while I regrouped. Not an ideal solution, but I had nowhere else to turn. It was my mom who picked up. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, trying not to sound desperate. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I don't think that would be a good idea, Arlen. Silas is staying with us right now, and we don't want to crowd the house. He's been focusing really hard on his music, and we're trying to give him space to create without distraction." I sat there holding the phone in disbelief. "Distraction?" I asked. She exhaled. "It's not personal. We just think you need to learn how to manage on your own. You're not a child anymore." I didn't argue. I thanked her and hung up. I'd always known Silas was the favorite, but this was the first time I felt it like a physical thing, like a line had been drawn, and I was clearly on the outside of it. So Silas, my younger brother, he's 5 years younger, loud in a charismatic way, and somehow manages to land on his feet no matter what mess he creates. He dropped out of college, tried about 7 different career paths, and currently calls himself a composer, though as far as I know, he's never actually completed a single piece of music longer than a jingle. My parents adore him, my mom especially. She says he reminds her of herself when she was young, even though I can't imagine my mom ever owning 3 guitars and refusing to get a part-time job because it would interrupt the creative flow. Every time I struggled, I kept it to myself. I didn't post about it online, didn't text my parents at midnight asking for help. I figured the quieter I kept my problems, the less likely they'd be used against me later. That's a lesson you learn when you grow up in a house where "what have you done for us lately" is practically a motto. Then came the day that finally broke me. It was a cold Thursday morning, early February. I hadn't slept well. Money anxiety tends to keep you up. I got up, opened my laptop, and was going through emails when I clicked over to Facebook. I don't check it often, but something compelled me that morning. Right there at the top of my feed was a post from my mom, a photo of her, my dad, and Silas smiling on the deck of a ship. The caption read, "A little family getaway to recharge the soul. So proud of Silas for everything he's been doing lately. We wanted to show him how much we believe in him. #FamilyTime #gratitude." I just stared at the screen. They had taken Silas on a cruise, a full vacation, no mention of me, of course. No call beforehand, no "hey, we're going to be out of town," just a public declaration of support for my brother while I was barely scraping together enough money to keep my phone turned on. I didn't react, not publicly, not immediately. I shut the laptop, stood in the middle of my 1-bedroom apartment, and just stood there. I didn't know what to feel, angry, sad, jealous. I wasn't even sure. It just felt like the final confirmation that I had officially been written off. A few days after they got back, I got a call from my mom. I didn't answer right away, let it ring a few times. Eventually, I picked up. Her tone was casual, light, like nothing had changed. "We just wanted to check in," she said, "see how you're doing." I paused. "Same as before, Mom. No job yet, still trying." There was a long silence. Then she said, "Well, Your father and I have been talking, and we think maybe it's time we stop trying to rescue you every time you hit a bump in the road. I let that sit for a moment. You didn't rescue me, I said. You didn't even offer. We raised you, we gave you tools, but you have to learn to be responsible for yourself. Silas is finally finding his footing, and we're not going to let negativity drag him down. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I just said, enjoy the trip. I'll remember this when you need me. There was a beat of silence before she responded, maybe it's time you learned some responsibility. I hung up. I packed a bag that night, walked out the door, and didn't look back. I didn't know where I was going exactly, but I knew something had shifted permanently. So after that call with my mom, the one that ended with her telling me I needed to learn some responsibility, I didn't go back inside right away. I remember I just stood there on the sidewalk outside my building with my bag slung over one shoulder, my breath fogging in the cold. Everything felt heavier than it should have, not just the bag, but the whole situation. Like every step I took from then on was going to be a permanent mark in a direction I couldn't return from. The apartment was due for inspection the next day. I'd already received the notice. Management had given me 2 warnings about late rent, and I knew what was coming, a formal eviction. I didn't have the strength to sit there and watch it happen. I stayed that night in the backseat of my car, parked in a 24-hour pharmacy lot near the edge of town. Not glamorous, but warmer than a park bench. I reclined the seat, pulled my coat over my face, and tried to block out the hum of the lot lights buzzing overhead. The next morning, I showered at a local gym. The staff didn't ask questions, I guess people learn not to. I grabbed coffee from a vending machine and sat outside on the curb, just watching people pass by, people in suits, people holding tote bags, couples with strollers, the kind of people who still had somewhere to be. That was the moment when I started thinking less like a victim and more like a historian, because everything after that phone call with my mom became a record of who said what, who did what, who stood by, and who stepped over me. Because here's the thing, my family didn't just not help, they started going out of their way to make me feel like I was a burden, like even existing near them was an inconvenience they couldn't afford. And they did it in small, sharp ways, like death by 1,000 cuts. I found out through a cousin that after the cruise, they threw Silas a celebration dinner, not a birthday, just a celebrating your growth type of thing. There were photos, balloons, a catered meal, even a custom cake with "To New Beginnings" in frosted script. I wasn't invited, no text, no mention, just quiet exclusion. When I called my aunt, who lives in the next city over, to see if I could visit for a weekend, she hesitated. She said my mother had shared some concerns about my attitude lately and that she wasn't sure it would be a good time. That one stung because my aunt used to be the closest thing I had to an ally in that family. She took me to get my driver's license, came to my college graduation when my parents were too busy with Silas's piano recital, and even slipped me money during hard times without making me feel guilty about it. Now, even she was distant. I started piecing it together. My mom was painting a version of me to everyone. Arlen the ungrateful, Arlen the moody, Arlen who needed to be cut loose so he could grow. Meanwhile, Silas was being paraded around like some kind of phoenix rising from ashes he'd never actually sat in. I learned he'd taken a break from his music to take an online course, something vague and artsy with no job prospects attached, but to my parents, that was effort, that was progress, that was enough for them to justify flying him across the ocean and throwing him parties while I was figuring out how to keep my car from getting towed. And the more I saw this twisted little narrative they were spinning, the more I realized that this wasn't just neglect, it was intentional. They were turning the family against me, slowly, carefully, like boiling a frog in water. They didn't want to help me, they wanted to make sure no one else did either. But here's the thing about writing people off, if you're going to make someone the villain of your story, you should be sure they don't know how to write their own ending. So I started documenting every ignored message, every passive-aggressive comment, every post that praised Silas while pretending I didn't exist. I kept screenshots, saved voicemails, recorded one particularly awkward phone call with my mom where she said, "Silas has always had that spark you were missing." And I didn't say a word, just let her keep going. I figured I'd need that someday, not to expose them publicly. No, that wasn't the point. The point was control, the one thing they'd always taken from me. I started working again, not in logistics, not yet, but odd jobs that paid just enough to keep gas in the car and food in my bag. I cleaned basements, helped an older man organize his late wife's things, even worked security at a local church one weekend. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And every night, I came back to the same lot, parked under the same flickering light, and made my plans. Because the truth is, my family had always seen me as the safety net, the one who'd show up when the roof leaked or when Silas's car broke down. I was the one they called when they needed things, legal advice, help moving, a second opinion. They'd spent years leaning on me without ever acknowledging it, and now, when I needed something, anything, they shut the door. Worse, they acted like I was the one abandoning them. So I decided, next time they came knocking, I'd be the one standing on the other side of the door. For the next couple of weeks after that, I lived in a strange sort of suspended state. I'd wake up in my car parked on the edge of the city, work odd jobs during the day, and spend my nights planning how I could reclaim not just my dignity but my place in this family. Because it was painfully clear to me by now that they wanted me erased, or at least forgotten. One afternoon, after a 12-hour shift helping a moving company unload furniture in a drizzly rain, I found myself staring at my phone in an empty parking lot, scrolling through their latest social media updates. My mom's posts were like a parade of everything I wasn't. Vacations, brunches with Silas's artsy friends, photos of him performing at some local open mic dressed like he had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. The captions were almost mocking in their sweetness, so proud of Silas for chasing his dreams. Nothing like family to keep you grounded. Grateful for every moment with my shining star. And then, almost like a slap, I saw a comment under one of those posts from my dad's old college friend. "When will Arlen be joining you all again?" We haven't seen him in a while. My mother replied curtly, Arlen is focusing on himself right now. We're giving him space to grow. It wasn't just exclusion anymore, it was public shaming. That's when the idea of revenge planted itself firmly in my mind. But here's the thing, I'm not the kind of guy who reacts on impulse. I never have been. I know from experience that rash decisions lead to more trouble, not less. So I took my time, collected information, observed, and waited. The first step was regaining stability. I found a small, steady job working for a local courier company. The pay was modest, but it was enough to rent a tiny studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I moved in quietly, no fanfare. My family didn't know where I was, and frankly, I didn't want them to. I spent my evenings combing through years of family photos, messages, and old emails I'd somehow saved. I was looking for patterns, weaknesses, anything that could tip the balance. And there it was, my parents had this obsession with appearances. They loved to control their image in the community, crafting a perfect narrative of success, culture, and family harmony. But behind closed doors, I'd always known things were different. There was tension, resentment, and more than a little hypocrisy. One thing I'd noticed was that my dad, who worked as a financial advisor, had been quietly struggling with some serious debts for years. My mom was equally strained, her social engagements and community roles masked the stress she felt trying to keep their lifestyle afloat. They'd hidden it well, but not well enough. One afternoon, I met with a woman named Gloria. She was a private investigator I found through a forum online. I explained my situation briefly, careful not to spill everything, and she agreed to help me look into my parents' finances. What I learned stunned me. They'd been siphoning money out of a family trust set up by my grandmother decades ago. The trust was supposed to support all her grandchildren, but my parents had been quietly redirecting the funds to pay for Silas's lavish lifestyle, music lessons, vacations, expensive gear, and for their own community events, which were more like networking parties where they showed off their status. Meanwhile, my name was erased from the trust records. The portion I was entitled to was being withheld indefinitely under the pretense that I was irresponsible and not ready to receive it. This was the family that told me to grow up and take responsibility, all while stealing from me. I took that information and filed a formal inquiry with the trust company, backed up by the evidence Gloria helped gather. I also started quietly reaching out to a lawyer who specialized in family estate cases. I was building my case. At the same time, I decided to tackle the social narrative. I created a new online profile, separate from my real name, and began sharing my side of the story anonymously in forums and social media groups. I told a careful, measured version of the truth about what had happened, how I was cast aside, how my parents played favorites, how they cut me off while spoiling Silas. The response was overwhelming. People shared similar stories, some offered advice, others support. For the first time, I felt heard. Then I started contacting some of the people from their social circle, the ones who had asked about me or commented on their posts. I sent polite messages correcting the narrative, telling them the facts calmly and clearly without drama or accusations. The truth is a powerful thing when delivered well. Some of them responded with surprise, others with disbelief, but cracks started to show. Meanwhile, Silas remained oblivious or indifferent to what was happening. At a family gathering I secretly attended, they didn't know I was there. I overheard him bragging about their latest trip, calling my mom the best mom in the world for supporting my dreams. I felt a sharp edge in my chest, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I watched, took notes, and planned. Because revenge for me wasn't about anger, it was about justice and teaching them that neglect has consequences. One evening, a week after that gathering, I received a message from my mom, Arlen, we need to talk. We're worried about you. I replied simply, so am I about you? She called, I didn't answer. The next day, I received a text from my dad asking if I was okay and if I wanted to meet. I agreed, just to hear what they had to say. When we met at a neutral cafe, my parents came in with their usual carefully rehearsed smiles. My mom opened with, we're willing to help you, Arlen, but you have to show us you're serious about changing. My dad added, you've been distant, and frankly, it's been hard for us to understand what you want from us. I looked at them, the people who had left me homeless, who'd hidden my inheritance, who'd publicly shamed me, and I said calmly, I want what's fair. I want honesty and I want respect. Starting with the truth about the trust. My mom's eyes flickered, her mask slipping for the briefest moment. My dad cleared his throat and said, let's not rush into this. I smiled quietly, too late for that. After that meeting at the cafe, I left feeling a mix of exhaustion and something I hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of hope. For the first time in months, I believed I might be able to crack through the wall my family had built around me. But I also knew better than to trust their words. My parents were masters of charm when they wanted something. I had to be careful. The days after that encounter were quiet on the surface. My parents sent a few texts checking in, always the right balance of concern and expectation. They wanted me to prove I was changing and ready to rejoin the family fold. Silas, meanwhile, was in his usual orbit of rehearsals, gallery openings, and brunches with friends who like to call themselves creatives. He had no idea what was happening behind the scenes, and frankly, I wasn't about to burst his bubble just yet. One morning, while working a delivery route across the city, I received an email from the trust company. They had reviewed my inquiry and found irregularities. The documents my parents had submitted to justify withholding my share were inconsistent, even fraudulent in parts. This was the confirmation I needed to bring legal action. The case wouldn't be quick or easy, family trusts are notoriously complicated, and my parents had been careful, but this was a start. I began spending my evenings meeting with a lawyer named Marcus, who specialized in family disputes and estates. Marcus was professional and direct, and more importantly, he believed me. He explained the process, gathering proof, preparing for mediation, and potentially a court battle. He warned me it would be draining emotionally and financially, but also that sometimes fighting back was the only way to get justice. I felt a strange comfort in the fight ahead. For so long, I'd felt powerless. Now, finally, I had a weapon: truth. Around this time, I also ramped up my quiet social campaign using my anonymous online persona. I started sharing more of the details I couldn't say openly, little truths about my family's hypocrisy, their perfect image, and the way they used Silas as a showpiece while they discarded me. Unexpectedly, messages started pouring in, people who had witnessed similar things in their own families, who understood the sting of being erased and betrayed. Some shared their own stories, others offered advice on how to navigate complicated family drama and legal battles. It wasn't revenge yet, it was solidarity, and it gave me strength. Then, one chilly Saturday afternoon, I got the call that changed everything. It was my mom. She was surprisingly calm, almost rehearsed. "Arlen, we think it's time for a family dinner to talk, to clear the air." I hesitated but agreed. Part of me thought this could be a trap, but another part longed for the family I once had, even if it was buried under layers of hurt and resentment. We agreed to meet at my parents' house. Walking into that house was like stepping into a museum. Everything was pristine, carefully arranged. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with the faintest hint of expensive candles. My dad was there, looking older than I remembered but still wearing that calm, authoritative air. Silas greeted me with a nod, his expression flickering with something unreadable. Dinner started, polite but stiff small talk, forced smiles. Then finally, my mom spoke. "We want to be honest with you, Arlen. We've made mistakes, but we also need to be honest about what we expect." My dad chimed in. "Silas has been working hard to build a future. We want you to do the same. No more freeloading, no more negativity." I stayed silent, letting their words hang in the air. Then I said, "You've cut me off financially, you've erased me from the trust, you threw a vacation for Silas but left me out in the cold, and then you expect me to just grow up and come crawling back?" My mom's smile faltered, and Silas shifted uncomfortably. "We did what we had to do," my mom replied coolly. "We were protecting the family." I laughed softly. "Protecting yourselves, maybe." The tension was thick, almost palpable. I could feel years of buried anger and disappointment pressing down on all of us. That night, I left their house with a new resolve. This wasn't just about money or vacations. This was about reclaiming my dignity and making them face the truth of what they'd done. Over the next few weeks, the battle intensified. My lawyer filed the first legal papers to challenge the trust management. My parents responded with their own letters, filled with threats and veiled accusations about my character. At the same time, I continued my social campaign, quietly sharing pieces of the story with people who mattered. Distant relatives, old family friends, even some members of the community who admired my parents but deserved to know the real story. And Silas, he began to realize something was off. I caught him watching me with a mixture of suspicion and something like fear when we crossed paths in public. His confidence seemed to wobble for the first time in years. One afternoon, I got a message from him, tentative and careful. "Can we talk?" I knew this was the moment when things could shift again. I replied, "Yes." "When and where?" He suggested a quiet coffee shop downtown. The day of our meeting arrived, and as I sat across from him, I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Silas had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, but now I saw cracks. He started, "Look, Arlen, I know things haven't been fair. I didn't ask for any of this." I nodded slowly. "I'm not mad at you, Silas. I'm mad at Mom and Dad, and I'm tired of being erased." He swallowed hard. "Maybe we can figure this out together." And just like that, the story wasn't just about me anymore. It was about family, broken yes, but maybe not beyond repair. Meeting Silas at that coffee shop was more draining than I expected. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his cup like a kid caught between loyalties. His usual arrogance was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was confusion, maybe even guilt. "I didn't ask for this," he repeated. "But Mom and Dad, they're really upset about all this legal stuff. They say I should stay out of it." I leaned back, studying him. "So they want you to pretend I don't exist, to keep the perfect image." "I get that." He swallowed. "It's complicated. Family usually is," I said quietly. "But I'm done pretending everything's fine when it's not." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Maybe you should just try to make peace." I looked him straight in the eye. "Peace? You mean letting them walk over me, using me as a backup plan when it suits them?" "No, thanks." That conversation felt like the last thread holding the family together snapped. From that day on, I started blocking calls and messages from all of them. The guilt trips, the concerned texts from my mother, the passive-aggressive comments from my dad, even Silas's occasional awkward attempts to reach out. I ignored them. I wasn't naive. I knew the damage I'd cause, especially to my mother's carefully crafted reputation. But at some point, you have to choose yourself over the people who repeatedly show they don't choose you. The legal battle dragged on for months. My parents tried everything, smearing me behind the scenes, threatening countersuits, and even trying to rally other relatives to their side. But I had the truth and the evidence, and I stuck to the facts, never stooping to their level of manipulation. In court, their facade cracked. The judge saw through their excuses and ordered an independent audit of the trust. The auditors confirmed the misappropriation of funds and ruled that my share be released to me immediately. When I finally received that first check, it wasn't just money, it was validation, it was a statement, I mattered. Socially, the tide shifted too. Some family friends who had once fawned over my parents quietly distanced themselves after hearing my side. A few relatives reached out privately to apologize for not speaking up earlier. But I didn't rush to forgive or mend fences. Forgiveness is earned, not demanded. I settled into my new life, renting a modest place and working steady jobs. It wasn't the life I dreamed of, but it was mine, free from their judgment and control. Then, One quiet evening, I deleted all traces of my anonymous social accounts. I told my story, exposed the truth, and now it was time to move on. A few months later, I received a brief email from my mother. It said, "Arlen, maybe now you understand family isn't just about money or fairness. It's about sacrifice and loyalty. When you're ready to come back, the door will be open." I didn't reply. Because here's the truth, family is not just blood. It's the people who stand by you when it counts. And my family, they chose their perfect image over me. So I chose myself. I blocked their numbers, unfollowed them all, and didn't look back. Sometimes, cutting toxic people out of your life is the most responsible and brave thing you can do. And honestly, it feels like freedom.